Consider this before viewing Conquistadors, Hernán Cortés, Part 1. The first Europeans who came to America were called explorers. Think about why Spain sent explorers to the New World. As you watch the program, pay attention to how these explorers became known as conquistadors. What did it mean to be a conquistador? Assignment Discovery now presents Conquistadors, Hernán Cortés, Part 1.
Five centuries ago, 500 Spanish adventurers became the first Europeans to invade mainland America. Led by the ruthless Hernán Cortés, lust for gold and glory clashed with ancient beliefs and human sacrifice as they confront the most ferocious people of the New World, the Aztecs. In their quest to conquer or die, they changed the destiny of the Americas. They are the conquistadors. On April 21st, 1519, an ominous sight appears off the coast of Mexico, a fleet of Spanish caravels. Unlike earlier expeditions that came here to explore, Hernán Cortés and his men have come to conquer. To the coastal people, the Tabascans, these Spanish warriors with huge ships and strange clothes were an awesome sight, a Tabascan chief observes.
They dress in iron and wear iron casques on their heads, so that only their faces can be seen. Their skin is white, as if it were made of lime.
In a language as alien as his appearance, a Spanish priest delivers an ultimatum: submit to God in Spain or face the consequences. The message is baffling, until the Spanish tear down the local idols and replace them with their own. Enraged by this sacrilege, the Tabascans prepare for battle.
The opening of a battle, from the Indian perspective, wouldn't really be proper without a good round of insults against the Spaniards. Anything they could do to try to enrage the enemy.
The Spaniards take the bait, unaware that ambush is their opponent's favorite tactic.
The Indians fight for entrapment. They fight almost more like an American football team. Their whole purpose is to try to bring an enemy into a trap.
Thousands of Tabascans lay in ambush, outnumbering the 500 Spaniards by 20 to 1. But the invaders possess a terrifying weapon never seen or heard in America. The roar of cannon spreads terror.
Their ability to actually make a landing on a shore and to invade them in such a capacity would have been extraordinary to them as American people.
It doesn't take the Tabascans long to regroup, but guns aren't their only problem. A Spanish soldier was Europe's most lethal killing machine, forged in a 700-year holy war against the Muslim invaders of Spain. He fought by a set of rules unthinkable to the Tabascans.
A Spaniard is motivated strictly by killing a man as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Now, to an Indian, that is a complete waste. An Indian is out to try to grab a Spaniard, to injure him first, make him a captive, bring him back to his city, and present him to his lord for rich rewards.
But the great shock weapon is the horse. At the time of the invasion, no Indian had ever seen a horse in the Americas. The Tabascans thought the horse and rider were one terrifying creature. Spanish cavalry of just 16 horses decimated the Tabascan ranks. Spanish soldier Bernal Diaz records,
with us attacking on one side and the horsemen on the other. They soon turned tail, and the savannas and fields were crowded with Indians running.
In this one-sided battle, the Tabascans lose thousands of men. The Spanish, just 2. With his first major victory, Cortés now has a foothold on the coast of America. Plagued by heat and insects, Cortés's men suffer under harsh and unfamiliar conditions. Cortés starts plotting his next move. He accepts Tabascan peace offerings of food, water, and, to the delight of his men, 20 female slaves.
The Tabascans were a fiercely independent, warlike people, but they were realistic enough to know when they were beaten. If you recognized somebody as stronger than you, then you presented them a tribute. And this was a traditional thing in this part of the world. But the women, there was a serious purpose to this, to represent the union, the future union and harmony between two different peoples, two different communities.
One is a young girl called Malinali, who immediately catches Cortés's eye. This teenage girl will become a crucial figure in the war for Mexico. To many, she will go down in history as La Malinche, the traitor.
She was around 16 or 17. She was very clever. She had a gift for languages. She learned Spanish in 3 or 4 months. She was very lovely. She talked all the time. She was very funny. And Malinali was a willing collaborator.
But the greatest prize the Spaniards seek from their new allies is gold. Gold, the Tabascans say, that comes from the Mexica, the Aztecs. A great civilization in the heart of Mexico, overflowing with gold. It was Cortés's lust for gold and glory which had brought him to the New World in 1506. Settling in Cuba, Cortés made a small fortune in mining gold from the rivers. This opened his eyes to what the rest of the New World might hold. The colony's governor, Diego Velázquez, would unwittingly set Cortés on his path to conquest. The Cubans were forced to work the Spanish plantations and mines. Many died from brutality and disease. The Spanish desperately needed replacements. Velázquez authorized an expedition west to what the Spaniards believed was another cluster of islands. In reality, it was mainland America. Cortés saw his chance. He persuaded his friend Velázquez to let him lead the expedition. But Velázquez soon began having doubts. He'd only authorized Cortés to explore the coast, trade with locals, and bring back slaves. But Cortés was organizing a large and well-armed fleet.
When he went around the island looking for volunteers to join the expedition, he clearly told them that he was planning to conquer. This is the reason why many people joined him.
Fearing that Cortés's expedition would rob him of his own dreams of conquest, Velázquez tried to oust Cortés as leader. Too late. Cortés had already set sail. It was February 18th, 1519. In open defiance of his patron, Cortés aimed to conquer a land he'd never seen. A decision that would have him branded a traitor and would nearly cost him his life. Now, 2 months later, with 500 men, Cortés plots his move inland to the heart of the Aztec Empire. Word of these foreign invaders had traveled 200 miles to the west to the immense city of Tenochtitlan, the fabulous Aztec capital. From their impregnable man-made island on Lake Texcoco, site of present-day Mexico City, the Aztecs rule over a vast empire of as many as 25 million subjects. Like the Spaniards, the Aztecs live for religion and war. Their emperor, the 50-year-old Moctezuma, was both a general and the high priest. Like the Spanish king, Moctezuma was seen by his people as their divine ruler.
The city itself is the center of the empire. The palace is the center of the city, and Moctezuma is the center of the palace. And all of this is influenced by several very powerful myths.
The Aztecs believe that unless they offered human blood to the sun god, the sun wouldn't rise the next day. Moctezuma's armies waged constant war on surrounding tribes to capture prisoners. Every day, they were sacrificed on the insatiable altars of the sun god. Sacrifice kept the terrible forces of the gods at bay and helped keep the world in harmony. The arrival of Hernan Cortés threatens to shatter this delicate balance. With his white skin and beard, Cortés resembles a figure from ancient Aztec mythology, the great god-king Quetzalcoatl. Banished from Mexico in the distant past, Quetzalcoatl had vowed to return in the year 1 Reed and reclaim his throne. Then, great tribulation would visit the people. By an amazing coincidence, the year of the Spanish invasion was the same as the Aztec year 1 Reed. Was this white stranger Quetzalcoatl? Nothing happens by chance in the Aztec world. While his priests and magicians try to explain the unexplainable, Moctezuma's ruling council is divided. Should they welcome the strangers with food and gifts, or should they destroy them?
The picture is of someone who developed a mental dilemma. Should he throw all of his military might against this advancing group, or should he wait and try to turn them in his direction into some sort of an alliance?
To the Aztecs, the Spanish were even a theological problem. Not just a political or a military problem, but they were like Martians. They came from another planet. They didn't even know if they were humans or what kind of humans, or maybe semi-gods, or maybe sent directly by the gods.
3 weeks later, Moctezuma has made his decision. He sends his ambassadors to the Spanish camp, bearing gifts of welcome. But neither Cortés nor any of his men can speak their language. The fate of Cortés's conquest hangs in the balance. It is Marinali who saves the day. As a child slave of the Aztecs, Marinali has learned their language. Now that knowledge will elevate her to a key role as translator and most trusted advisor to Cortés.
He was brought up to hate the Aztecs. So for her, the Aztecs were enemies, arch enemies. These Spaniards gave her importance. Then she said, I want to belong to them. I want them to win, because if they win, I'll win. And I think that at that moment, she started admiring Cortés.
As Marinali translates, Cortés learns that the great emperor Moctezuma has sent the emissaries. They dress Cortés in religious robes.
Among the Aztecs, whenever you sacrificed someone, you always turned them into a god. But in particular, dressing them in images of gods, you transform them into the gods to prepare them for sacrifice. And I've begun to wonder if this wasn't another meaning in that gift, that he was actually identifying Cortés as potentially a victim of sacrifice.
They offer him a drink they believe worthy of a god. A cup filled with their own blood. Horrified, Cortés orders a demonstration of Christian firepower. The envoys return to Tenochtitlan with news of their encounter with these strangers from another world and their terrible weapons. Moctezuma's generosity has backfired.
His religion does not show him what to do with Cortés and the Spaniards, but Christianity and the monarchy do tell the Spaniards what to do about the Aztecs. Yeah, conquer them.
Cortez is left wondering how Moctezuma will retaliate. Despite his cannon and his horses, he knows he can't conquer an empire of millions with only 500 men. But luck is on his side. Another tribe, the Totonacs, seek an alliance against the Aztecs. The Totonacs want Cortez to help them overthrow their hated Aztec rulers. The resentment of other subjects of the Aztecs will provide Cortez with the key to his conquest. To impress his new friends, Cortez seizes tax collectors sent by the Aztecs. Later, he secretly released them with a false message of peace for Moctezuma. When the news got out, Cortez lied to the confused Totonacs, claiming the Aztec prisoners must have escaped. But Cortez is playing a deadly game. Will his alliance with sworn enemies of the Aztecs provoke Moctezuma and his 400,000 warriors to crush Cortez's small band of 500 men? Not knowing whether the Aztecs plan to attack, Cortez and his men sail further up the coast. On the run from his patron, Governor Velázquez, Cortez is now determined to found the first Spanish settlement. To cover his back, he writes to his sovereign, Charles V, King of Spain, seeking royal approval.
Velázquez, of course, has also written to the king, letting him know that there is a case of treason here. And obviously Cortez makes the point that there is no treason, that it's just the opposite. He makes the point that Velázquez is the real traitor to the crown because he insists on a trading expedition instead of gaining new territory for the king. And most important of all, Cortez is very smart. He convinces his men to send absolutely every single piece of gold, everything that he has got, together with the letter. This will be very persuasive indeed.
On his way up the coast, Cortez plans to break his contract with Velázquez and founds the city of Veracruz to legitimize his right of conquest.
As soon as you establish a city, you can establish a city council. And of course, he packed it with his own men. The city council turned around and declared that Cortez had fulfilled all of the obligations that he had to Velázquez under their contract, and he was now freed from that contract.
But supporters of Cortez's patron, Velázquez, were outraged. They plotted to steal a ship and sail back to Cuba. But Cortez would let nothing stop him. When he discovered the plot, he hanged the ringleaders and flogged the other conspirators. Then, to ensure that no one would escape, in one of the most daring and dangerous moves of the conquest, Cortez ordered all his ships scuttled.
The ships were sunk at night when nobody was looking. So in the morning, it was a fact already. He wanted to make a very clear point to his men that there was no way back, that the only possibility was to go inland, that it was either glory or death.
On August 8th, 1519, 4 months after landing on the coast, Cortez leaves a garrison of 150 men and sets off to confront an empire of millions. He has just 300 soldiers and 800 native allies. Although the Aztecs have an army of over 400,000 warriors, Cortez vows to conquer or die. This single-minded obsession with conquest came from his boyhood dreams in the hills of Spain. He was born in rural Extremadura in 1484. Growing up, young Cortez's imagination was fired by exotic legends of El Cid and the Crusades. He yearned to be a holy warrior. Then, in the space of 1 year, two momentous events rocked Europe. The Moors, who'd occupied Spain for over 700 years, were finally driven out. Reunified under a powerful monarchy, Spain was acquiring an empire. Then, shortly after, Christopher Columbus brought amazing news to the Spanish court. His discovery across the Atlantic in 1492 of the New World.
This was a very special moment in the history of Spain. Cortés was a very young man when this was happening. He was somehow affected by this general atmosphere of excitement, many new possibilities.
Young Cortés was yearning for a life of adventure, glory, and riches. At age 22, he finally set sail for the New World. Now, 13 years later, Cortés was risking everything for his boyhood dreams. As the Spanish struggle through the jungle in their heavy armor, the heat is unbearable. With every step, they find evidence of Aztec might. The Spanish stay on their guard. They come across great temples, unlike anything back in Spain. And what lies inside shocks them to the core. Human sacrifice.
The Aztecs didn't see it as human sacrifice, didn't refer to it as human sacrifice. They called it debt paying. The sun god gave his life to bring life to mankind. Now mankind has to offer something in return.
While sacrifice played a crucial role in Aztec ritual life, the economic wealth of the society depended heavily on an elaborate tax system imposed on its conquered subjects. 200 years earlier, the Aztecs had been mercenaries. As a small warrior tribe, the Aztecs settled on an island in the center of Lake Texcoco. As fierce warriors, the Aztecs soon conquered most of the neighboring tribes. As their empire grew, so did its wealth. Heavy taxation provoked widespread discontent. But the Aztecs sustained their rule with spectacular blood rituals.
The Aztec Empire was strong at the core, but beyond the Valley of Mexico, there were uneasy alliances with some powerful neighbors, and some of the alliances were actually themselves neighbors of enemies of the Aztecs.
For 17 years, Moctezuma ruled over a glorious and triumphant empire, but a deadly shadow hung over its future. His decision not to act with force let the Spanish invaders deep into the heart of his empire.
Now that you've seen Conquistadors, Hernán Cortés Part 1, talk about this. The Aztecs were loathed and feared by the Totonacs and Tabascans. In what ways did the Aztecs alienate their neighbors? How did Cortés use other groups' distrust of the Aztecs to his own advantage? Discuss the merits and the risks of this military strategy. Now try this. Use maps, the internet, and a reference book to create a map of ancient Mexico. Include cities, land formations, and bodies of water. Labeled the route that Cortés followed from Yucatan to Tenochtitlan. For videos, CD-ROMs, lesson plans, and teacher resources on this topic and more, log on to discoveryschool.com. To learn more, Assignment Discovery suggests Hernán Cortés and the Conquest of Mexico by Gina DeAngelis. Consider this before viewing Conquistadors, Hernán Cortés Part 2. As you watch the program, think about the dangers that sailors faced while traveling to the New World in the 16th century. What perils would they have faced on sea and land? Think about what motivated Hernan Cortés and other explorers to make dangerous and financially risky voyages to the New World. Assignment Discovery now presents Conquistadors, Hernan Cortés Part 2.
The Spaniards made slow progress. Plagued by insects, they slept barely 5 hours a night, with no reliable supplies of food or water.
An army of this size is probably not going much over 12 miles per day, maybe 15 at the outside, but it would have been very slow going. And so they marched for many days, but very, very slowly.
Forced to scavenge for food, the Spaniards begin to weaken. Morale plummets. Unused to this harsh climate, men sicken and die. As conditions grow worse, Cortés fears mutiny, but his Indian guides assure him he will soon find new allies. A powerful tribe and enemy of the Aztecs, the Tlaxcalans. Cortés sends them a crossbow, a symbol in Europe of peace. It's a terrible mistake. The Tlaxcalans interpret it as a declaration of war. Outnumbered by an army of up to 100,000 men, the Spaniards are facing certain death. For 2 relentless weeks, Cortés and his 300 weakening men battle against 100,000 Tlaxcalan warriors. Their dreams of gold and conquest, a distant memory. Survival in the present now seems their only hope.
The Tlaxcaltecas are a critical turning point because they have a huge army. And after all Cortés's limitations, military limitations with such a small army, I think he probably thought, this is the limit of what I can defeat.
Cortés was trapped on a hilltop with several men dead and 60 wounded. His men were losing hope. Peace, he claimed, was on the way. It was a desperate lie.
The situation with the Tlaxcalans was very, very bad indeed. And they were on the verge of being annihilated. Cortés himself must have had doubts, but the last thing you could possibly do in those circumstances was falter, show signs of weakness. And so this does seem to exemplify this astonishing ability he has to bind his people to him and keep them going in extraordinarily adverse circumstances.
Then, within a few days, the Tlaxcalan leaders arrived at Cortés's camp. Another gamble that paid off. Miraculously, the Tlaxcalans wanted to make peace. Cortés now struck his most important alliance of the conquest. With the Tlaxcalans at his side, the tiny Spanish force was growing into a full-scale army. Once again, Malinali's role as a go-between was pivotal.
There was a turning point. Malinali now had been beginning to see the importance that she had in translating, because if she didn't translate well, they could have easily been killed.
Cortés was now deeply indebted to Malinali's extraordinary talents, and their relationship changed.
She helped to set up this absolutely pivotal alliance which lasts throughout the conquest period. The Tlaxcalans are the most faithful and effective of all the allies that Cortés had.
But the Tlaxcalans had reasons of their own for making peace.
What the Tlaxcalans were doing was creating an alliance with the Spaniards because the Spaniards could then serve as the shock troops to their army against the Aztecs.
Aztec chronicles report that when Moctezuma received news of the alliance, he fell into a stunned silence.
For a long time he remained thus, then spoke. What help is there for us now, my friends? We can do nothing but wait.
The Aztec Council remained deeply divided over what they should do next. Should they now attack the strangers and their allies, or let them continue their march to the city and greet them as guests? On November 2nd, 1519, after 3 months traveling, Cortés and his allies finally reached the mountains surrounding the Aztec capital. Moctezuma now has no alternative. He must act quickly. He decides to send envoys bearing gold, hoping the strangers will take the gifts and leave. They don't. The Aztec envoys reported.
They picked up the gold and fingered it like monkeys. The truth is, they hungered like pigs for that gold.
The idea that Cortés might be the returning god Quetzalcoatl had long since vanished. The Spanish reaction to gold was all too human. But Moctezuma's attempt to stop the Spaniards from entering his great capital backfired spectacularly.
If he wanted to convince them to go away, actually what this did was exactly the opposite, because once they saw the presents, real gold, then the Spaniards thought, well, now we're going to stay, of course.
On November 8th, 1519, after an epic 3-month journey, Hernán Cortés finally led his men towards the island city of Tenochtitlan. Its gleaming white pyramids, testament to the glories of a city that was bigger than anything they'd ever seen. Hoping to impress the Spaniards with a display of great extravagance, Moctezuma prepared for the meeting. As the two sides approached each other along one of the city's causeways, the air grew thick with excitement and fear. They met halfway. Cortés explained he'd come in peace, the ambassador of a great emperor from far across the sea. Moctezuma welcomed him as a most honored guest and invited him to lodge in one of his palaces. Once again, Cortés's teenage interpreter was crucial, as the Aztecs soon realized.
Moctezuma and the Aztecs saw Malinali as a formidable enemy because they knew that she gave Cortés and the Spaniards all the inside information that he couldn't have known but for her. And so they really hated her.
They think this is going to be just a brief visit where they will exchange presents and maybe get to know each other a little bit. They will get to know the city, and then of course they will leave. But Cortés seems to think that he will convince them that this is going to be permanent. These were the guests who would never leave. Actually, he took the whole army with him into the city. So obviously he was very confident that nothing would happen. I think he wanted to impress the Aztecs psychologically so much that they would be almost immobilized by this act of daring.
The Spanish were awestruck at a metropolis whose population of 250,000 surpassed even the largest cities in Europe. But wonder soon turned to fear. News arrived that the Aztecs had dismantled 2 of Tenochtitlan's causeways and attacked the colony at Veracruz, Cortés's stronghold on the coast 200 miles away. Cortez's men thought they'd been lured into a trap. Cortez confronted Moctezuma. One of his men lunged violently at the emperor, but Cortez restrained him. Cortez then pretended he'd just saved Moctezuma's life. The two debated the news for hours, and then, in an act of unbelievable audacity, Cortez placed Moctezuma under arrest. Amazingly, the emperor submitted without a struggle.
The question is, why would he have done that? Why wouldn't he have resisted? He was making a decision basically as the lowest cost, easiest way out of a situation, rather than making a military choice of immediately attacking and wiping out these Spaniards.
To cover their actions, the Spaniards created diversions and confusion.
Once Moctezuma is taken prisoner, after extending this hospitality and becoming what looks like a kind of ally of Cortez, not only for him, but certainly for the ruling council, anyone who heard it, this would have been understood as a betrayal, as a terrible danger that had struck the palace, the empire, and now perhaps the cosmos.
Cortez then tortured one of Moctezuma's generals until he confessed that the emperor himself ordered the attack on Veracruz.
It's quite crazy, actually, to have the emperor arrested. But obviously, he must have thought that somehow, by shocking everyone, he would achieve a total state of immobilization in the empire. And that's exactly what he achieved.
With Moctezuma as a puppet ruler, the Spaniards were now masters of the city. For the next 2 months, Cortez and Moctezuma tried to come to terms with each other. Cortez spoke about his God and urged Moctezuma to become a Christian. The emperor refused. Moctezuma developed a strange relationship with his captors.
Some people even talk about him being in the Stockholm syndrome, of the person who becomes almost friendly with his captors.
Though technically still the Aztec emperor, Moctezuma's grip on the general council gradually weakened. So Cortez pushed for a formal transfer of power.
I think most people would have expected the Aztecs to rise against Cortez or something like that, but he's actually able to convince Moctezuma to tell everyone, stay quiet, stay there.
It appears that the other members of the council were also thrown into crisis. On the one hand, what can they do while their ruler is still alive, and they're having difficulty getting access to him? On the other hand, they've still got to deal with day-to-day crisis, which they're doing, and they're still waiting to see, waiting to find out exactly what is going to be the outcome.
The official handover of power took place in early January 1520. The great Aztec Empire now belonged, in name at least, to King Charles V and Spain, and so did all its treasures. As the king's self-appointed ambassador, Cortez now claimed his prize, more gold than he could ever have imagined. Over 100 tons of gold were looted, as well as countless gems and precious stones. Desperate to legitimize his actions and win the king's favor, Cortez wrote to Charles, but victory was premature. Moctezuma was furious at the looting and begged Cortez to take his gold and go. Cortez refused. But several weeks later, Moctezuma suddenly received encouraging news. Another Spanish leader had arrived on the coast, but he was clearly no friend of Cortez. Governor Velasquez had sent a fleet from Cuba to arrest Cortez and execute him for treason. Moctezuma seized his chance. He told Cortez about the ships, but not why they'd come. Cortés always worried that Velázquez would come looking for him. He left Tenochtitlan in the hands of his deputy, Pedro de Alvarado, and with 340 men set out for the coast to confront them. Cortés took the new Spanish arrivals by surprise. With his tales of the vast riches still left to plunder in the Aztec capital, Cortés convinced 900 men to switch sides. 2 months later, they arrived back at Tenochtitlan to find their position turned upside down. Pedro de Alvarado and his 120 men were besieged by the citizens and had lost control of the city. At a religious festival, Pedro de Alvarado had massacred 3,000 Aztecs. The Aztecs retaliated, hunting down and killing Spaniards.
He probably felt so confident that he should be able to convince Moctezuma once again to tell his men to stay calm. And he tried that, but obviously it didn't work this time.
Still incarcerated, Moctezuma managed to convince Cortés that the release of his brother, Cuitláhuac, whom the Spaniard had also arrested, would pacify the city. But in truth, Moctezuma was passing his authority as emperor onto Cuitláhuac in the hope of overthrowing the Spaniards and preserving the Aztec Empire. From the palace, Cortés forced Moctezuma to plead for peace. It was the last time the broken emperor addressed his people. A few hours later, he was dead. The Spaniards always claimed Moctezuma was slain by his own outraged subjects. The Aztecs insist he was murdered by the Spanish. By the end of June 1520, the situation in Tenochtitlan was worsening. Trapped, Cortés finally decided to make a run for it. With each man carrying as much gold as he could, they made a break for the causeway out of the city. Then the Aztecs struck in a terrifying frenzy of screams and wailing, as one of Cortés's captains recalled.
In truth, in all the war and all the terrors I went through, I was never so afraid as when I heard that awful lamentation.
This time, it was the Spaniards' turn to be massacred. A disaster that has become known as the Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrow. Over 600 Spaniards and thousands of their Tlaxcalan allies perished. For days after, could be heard the joyous sounds of Aztec celebration, along with the cries of the Spanish prisoners being sacrificed. It was a devastating defeat for the Spaniards. Cortés's dreams of conquest hung in the balance. Driven out of the Aztec capital, his boyhood dreams of conquest now seemed doomed to failure. A demoralized Cortés retreats to Tlaxcala with less than 400 men. But fate deals Cortés a terrible and deadly advantage. No one could have imagined the destructive power of this new ally brought from Europe. Within years, it would kill almost 90% of the Aztec population. With no immunity to European diseases, the Aztecs were decimated by what they called the Great Rash, smallpox.
Covered with agonizing sores from head to foot, the sick were so utterly helpless they could only lie on their beds like corpses.
Cortés regrouped his forces and strikes at the weakened Aztec capital.
He said, now we have an obligation to retake Tenochtitlan because Tenochtitlan is technically Spanish already.
He builds 13 ships and in June 1521 uses them to blockade the great lake of Texcoco that surrounds the Aztec capital. Even without food or fresh water, the debilitated city still resists, but it's only a matter of time.
The Aztecs are starting to lose ground. The building after building is being blown up. The Aztec warriors themselves are becoming the walls, the final resistance.
It takes Cortez and his massive army of allies 3 months of continuous assault to destroy the proud capital of the Aztecs. Cortez triumphs for God and Spain. Tenochtitlan lies in smoldering ruins. On the ashes of the crushed Aztec capital, Cortez begins to build a new Christian colony where thousands of Spaniards will settle. But Cortez can never foresee the union of cultures that will become Mexico.
Regardless of the fact that one side won, the real legacy is a union of 2 cultures and the creation of a new people.
In 1522, Charles V receives a letter from Cortez telling of the great victory for the Spaniards, but they haven't done it alone. While Cortez was the driving force, without his hundreds of thousands of native allies, the Spanish wouldn't have stood a chance against the Aztecs.
The reality is Indians conquered the Aztecs, not Spaniards. And so it was an Indian victory over Indians, but the Spaniards ended up taking all the spoils.
7 years after his victory over the Aztecs, Cortez returns to Spain. He receives the recognition and legitimacy he'd craved all his life. The king pardons Cortez and makes him Marquis of the Valley of Mexico, with a right to 1/12 of the Aztec riches. Having come from nothing, after 22 years in the New World, Cortez now owns vast estates all over Mexico and is one of the wealthiest men in Europe. Young Marinali lives the rest of her life in the capital of New Spain, Mexico City. But even this final royal approval doesn't satisfy Cortez. Ever restless, he squanders his fortune searching for new lands to conquer. He never finds them, and dies outside Seville on December 2nd, 1547. He was a man whose actions irreversibly changed the destiny of a continent, who pushed himself and his men to every extreme, and who lived by the simple motto, conquer or die.
Keep watching. Discussion topics and activity and resources for Conquistadors, Hernán Cortés Part 2 are up next on Assignment Discovery. Now that you've seen Conquistadors, Hernán Cortés Part 2, talk about this. Montezuma II decided to send gifts to the Spanish after learning of their alliance with neighboring peoples. What did he hope to accomplish by sending gifts? Why was his choice of gifts a fatal error? Discuss the Spanish soldiers' reactions to the gifts. Now try this. Imagine you're an Aztec living in the 16th century and strange visitors have come to your city recently. Write a diary entry that describes the clothing, speech, and actions of the Spanish. For videos, CD-ROMs, lesson plans, and teacher resources on this topic and more, log on to discoveryschool.com. To learn more, Assignment Discovery suggests The Conquest of Mexico by Stephen R. Lilly.